we were audacious enough to ask him for $5 million on a pre-product, pre-everything idea, and we were very surprised when he turned us down. It was crazy big those days. We were like 50 lakhs, and then we were already superstars in our friend circle.
The more inventory you have, the more advertisers you will attract. The more advertisers you will attract, the more you will be able to sweat your inventory. And the more you are able to sweat your inventory, the better you are able to pay for acquiring more inventory.
It was like a 7 lakh rupees bill rate. And for us, it was like life changing. Literally, 7 lakh was something that we never imagined that could come from our customers. I did not imagine things to be this hard when we
Right.
started doing this. And I've definitely aged 15 years in the last 5 years. For sure, mentally and physically. I probably mentally have aged 25 years in the last 5 years. Hey, hi everyone. I'm Sandeep, the co-founder of Adonmo. We are India's largest digital screen network.
Okay, so Sandeep, what got you into entrepreneurship? Give me like an origin story of Sandeep, the founder.
Uh, I mean, I grew up in a small, now probably it's called a city, but for all practical purposes, still a town, a very large village in a way, right? Called Rajahmundry in Andhra Pradesh. So for me, growing up, childhood was simple only. Not that I wanted to be X, Y, Z or anything, but definitely one thing that influenced my behavior since I was a kid was I was always the one kind of getting people together, trying to do things and make things happen, kind of a kid. Mostly towards organizing cricket and football matches, though nothing to do with useful academic stuff. My mom was definitely an influencer who kind of got me started. Got me started on this whole notion of starting a company on my own and all of that. And when I was in college, once I got into Microsoft, the whole idea was to then, okay, what more can I do and achieve? And that's how the whole startup thing caught on. Of course, that's also the time when startups were just coming up, right? Zomato just raised their, I think, the Series B. All of Flipkart was already a fairly large company by then, and that's the first time we came across the notion of startups, and it really caught my eye. Mostly not for the right reasons, probably for a little bit of glitz and glamour that was being associated with it, and also the whole interest to really bring people together and then do something fun. So that's how I got into this whole startups thing.
And uh, what you're doing today is like very different from what you started with. Just take me through that journey, the pivots that happened. What was the version one idea, and what happened when that idea met reality?
Yeah, so of course, there were a few failed startup attempts that we were doing while in college. In fact, our current head of product, head of technology, and we've tried a couple of products which failed.
What kind of products?
Our first version was something like housing.com before housing.com became a thing. So we wanted to analyze each pin code and give insights and then have listings and all. The second product was a platform for listing platforms for hospitals, similar to how Zomato is for restaurants. We When I say failed products, it's largely failure to really get them to market. We kept on building, and then at some point the interest died out, and then we would make a switch. And both of them are pre-revenue, of course. Not that we've done much work there, but with this time in Microsoft. When I wanted to start, I really was looking at how we can do it differently this time around. And That's how my co-founder Shravant and I got together. Shravant came from a different kind of a background. He did his masters in the US, then went to ISB. He had a little bit of experience building a product vertical for one of the companies back then. And when we decided to start up, we thought it will be a good combination. Both of us, we obviously share a lot of good friendship around cricket, movies, and all of that. Of course, he's about 6 years older than I am, but we almost gel like we are classmates, right? And for us, when we wanted to start, we were looking at a bunch of ideas. We were seeing where we can do something different. So this one article about, I remember the company's name was Rapify. It's a US based company. It was about them where they were being called the Uber of advertising, right? So the whole concept was they would wrap the cars based on which location the car was driving in. The customers would pay them only for the relevant locations, and the driver would get paid when they drive in the locations that matter. Right? It was a very interesting idea of making advertising paper value kind of a model, right? For especially the mobility advertising. So we initially start wanted to do that. Of course, very quickly we realized that that's not 10x better than what's already there in the market, and it won't
So what's
buy.
already there is the hoardings.
Hoardings and also even car wraps was there, right? In India, car wrapping was happening. What we wanted to do is just slap a Google Map platform on top and then start doing tracking and give sort of analytics on where your car traveled, how many of those hours were relevant. Let's say if someone's driving outside on a highway, the client shouldn't pay for that time, right, of advertising versus when it's being driven in the city. So we it was definitely an incrementally better model than what was there, but we didn't feel it's 10x better, so that there'll be a radical shift. So that's when we were in Goa and we
One
saw this.
one
Yeah,
question here. This you're still at Microsoft at this time?
yeah, still at Microsoft.
Okay,
This
and
was in fact
you
2015 and all. So I just finished my GMAT. The idea was to go to a business school. I got a good solid 750 in GMAT, and that's when I wanted to take a shot at entrepreneurship again after college, and that's how this whole thing. Shravant and I got together, and then we. Shravant was also
uh,
looking to start up at some point, and then we got together.
I'm assuming Shramant would have gotten in the advertisers, like the business development part of it. Like,
No, so the funny part is for us, it was a whole 1.5, 2 years of journey before we even got our first advertiser, right? Because the product we eventually started building was screens on top of cabs, right? And there was no off the
like
shelf.
a how big a screen are we talking about here? Like,
It's like a 1 foot into 3 feet kind of a LED screen placed
hmm,
on literally on top of the cab, right?
okay,
And this is rear facing kind of screen. So for us, obviously, this is not a product that we can just buy from the market and then put it on the car and then start running, right? So we had to literally make the product. There was something that, of course, was there in China. China literally produces everything in the world. So we got that device. It was almost as expensive as a car, as expensive as a used car. Our first device was 1.5 lakh, and a used car we bought to put the device on was 45,000. So that's how absurd the economics were. So we then got the device entirely re-engineered on how it is made in China, and then we made it in India for 29,000 rupees.
wow.
That's when the economics started making sense. So in all this process of doing this and then raising enough money to put enough devices on the road, it took a solid 1.5 year before we got our first meaningful paying customer. We of course had few family customers who were paying us for the heck of it, but the first meaningful paying customer came end of 2017 and mid of 2018.
By this time, you had quit Microsoft.
Yeah, end of
What
2007, mid of 2017 is when I quit Microsoft.
what was the trigger? Like, was it the fundraise? You said you raised some funds. Was
Yeah,
that the
so
trigger?
Our first check came in a funny way. We were obviously trying to pitch to a lot of investors, trying to see if anyone will take the bite. And our whole perception of how fundraise was done in startups was very screwed up, right? So we were thinking if smart kids with an interesting idea would walk into a room, make a pitch, they'll walk out with a few $1 million. At least that's how the
Yeah.
media was portraying it, and
Yeah.
we believed that was true. And I remember our first pitch, we did it to this man who was a very early investor in Google. We somehow got connected to him through family. And we were audacious enough to ask him for $5 million on a pre product, pre everything idea. And we were very surprised when he turned us down. That's how naive we were. We were almost like, okay, this is not how this is supposed to work, right? You're supposed to give us the check and then conclude the meeting. So that's how naive we were. And but our first check came in a very unexpected location at my cousin's wedding. Randomly struck a conversation with a stranger about what am I doing and all. I was telling him that I'm working at Microsoft, planning to go to a business school. Oh, by the way, we started this new venture recently, and this is what we do. And in the process of not actually selling the idea to him, I did a very good job selling the idea to him. And then
Wow.
end of conversation, he told me, okay, you have a check for 20 lakh rupees, right?
Mm.
And I was like, okay, what are you talking about? He then told me he's an investor in Silicon Valley. He backs companies at early stage. And that's how we got the first check. And then once after we get the first check, it literally the last 20 odd $1 million we raised was a fraction of the difficulty that we went through to raise the first 20 lakh rupees, right?
Mm.
And then things started rolling. And when we decided to quit Microsoft, our managers also invested into the company.
Oh, wow.
So that was enough validation for us to go full time. And we were young; we didn't have much to lose.
Mm.
Luckily, for both of us, we come from reasonably well settled families where we don't have to send money back home at least
Mm.
every month.
How
So
much money did you
that's
have in the bank by the time you finished that first round?
company capital, personal capital.
Company, in the company's bank
Company
account.
capital, we raised a total of about 40 lakhs, 40 to 50 lakhs.
Okay.
By the
Hmm.
time we quit
Hmm.
Microsoft,
Hmm.
50
Which
lakhs.
might have seemed like a big number, but now you
Oh
probably
yeah, it
know
was.
with hindsight, it's not a big number.
It was crazy big those days. We were like
Yeah.
50 lakhs, and then we were already superstars in our friend circle,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. Okay. So then you figured out that screens is the way to go instead of a wraparound. Uh, w- why is that? Because screens are dynamic. Content can be
Yeah,
updated.
it seemed interesting. So we saw this cab go around in Anjuna Beach area, right, in Goa, advertising party at Anjuna Beach tonight and all. It wasn't a screen; it was still a static thing. But the whole relevance of that car doing that messaging in that location at that time made a lot of sense. And the only way you can achieve that is with a actual screen with dynamically changes, and that's how we got into this. By then, actually, we did not know this existed in the world. There was only one small company doing this out of the UK, which pretty much started 1 year before us, and then Firefly in the US pretty much started just after us. So it was literally almost the first time in the world that we were attempting to do it.
Hmm. And this is when you got your first customer. Who was the first customer?
So the first general customer was obviously someone from the family. One of our hospital was came on board as our first customer, but the first real meaningful customer was definitely IKEA, where we closed like a 7 lakh rupees deal, right? And for us, it was like life changing. Literally, 7 lakh was something that we never imagined that could come from one customer in one PO, and it was. It also happened in a very unexpected way where they were setting up shop in Hyderabad. So the IT minister then brought them to T Hub to just showcase how startup ecosystem is, and then we somehow they happened to meet us, and then after that for 3 months we were continuously behind their back to do something with us, and that's how it converted. And they got introduced us to GroupM, and GroupM turned out to be our largest customer even till date.
Okay. Okay,
Even IKEA
interesting.
is our second largest customer to
Hmm.
date. So that was a good conversion.
So typically, large enterprises prefer not to directly deal with
Yeah,
the media properties, but work through an agency
correct,
so that the agency can manage everything.
correct, correct.
Hmm, interesting. Okay. So GroupM came on board for IKEA. I'm assuming someone like GroupM coming on board means that if it works, then they would really help you scale it up.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that easy also, because for the longest time for GroupM to take, I mean, of course, this is a request that came in from IKEA, so they had to take it. But for us, the thing is, we were still very small. We only had like a couple of hundred cars. It wasn't meaningfully large enough for a GroupM to even look at. Even if they buy the full inventory, it's only about 10 lakhs a month, right? And it's not large enough for them to even add a new line item in their media plan for taxi top advertising. It did help us give perspective of how the industry worked and all. For the longest time, IKEA was the only client that GroupM gave us. But of course, when we pivoted the model from there, it was all GroupM was able to help us quite a bit.
And why did you pivot? Like, how
Yeah,
long
so
did it run with IKEA before you got more clients in? And
no, I think right after IKEA, we raised our seed round. We raised about, I think, back in the day, $1 million, which was about six something crores.
hmm.
Largely showcasing IKEA as a primary client. And by then, we also had some of these interesting conversations with some of these celebrity investors like Rajmouli and the producers of Bahubali and all of that. So that was another interesting story where when around the time when we were looking to launch, Bahubali was also releasing, and we went to them asking to advertise on our platform, and they told us that brands are actually paying them to co-brand along with Bahubali. So they kind of asked us to pay them to advertise them, and that's literally not the way we imagined this business model to work.
Right.
And
Okay.
somehow then eventually they were kind enough to say, okay, TK, you advertise, but we won't pay you anything. And we were obviously naive enough to say, thanks a lot for that. And we'll go with them. So after the movie came out and it was a big success, after a few months, we went back to them to just thank the producer for everything and all of that. And then he asked us, "Are you guys raising funds? Are you guys looking to raise funds?" And then we started acting very pricey. We were like, "We just finished a round. We're not in the market to raise money. This is going to be very big." All the typical FOMO stuff that founders say, right?
You had become pretty savvy by then, huh? With all
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
you understood the investor psyche well. Huh? That struggle, the initial struggle, taught you well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think so. Then they were kind enough to actually put in a check and also back us with few nice introductions and everything, and that kind of started our real big fundraising cycle. And that, and then IKEA coming, and then we raising a million. All of that happened in a span of 6 months, which was the first big substantial move towards a meaningful company, right? And with that, we continued building. We scaled up to 2,000 caps. Then Ant Financial's early stage fund called Base Capital, they've come and invested looking for the focus media of India, right? That was their thesis. And unfortunately,
What is this
uh,
term? Focus media.
Focus Media is a Chinese company. They're over $20 billion in market
Hmm.
cap. They do ambient digital advertising. So they put up screens in buildings and
Okay.
all. They were, of course, looking for that, but we were the closest thing they could find in India. They were evaluated few other companies who were doing exactly what Focus Media is doing, but who were companies that weren't interesting for them, largely run in a more traditional way. So they invested in us with the hope that someday we will eventually get into building the focus media model also. But they like the cap model. So as soon as they invested, obviously COVID came. Before COVID came, we went out all aggressive, spent 80% of our investment to buy hardware for the expansion.
Hmm.
And then as soon as COVID came, the hardware got was proven obsolete, right? And we literally had very little money in the bank, about 3 crores, and that's when we made the pivot wanting to give one final shot at it, and then to see if we can actually get somewhere. And for us also during
You
COVID, huh,
uh, you must have thought that you're building the Google of taxi top advertising with a layer of data and a performance marketing kind of an ability, allowing clients to bid on locations. And I mean, that all that must have been on your roadmap, right? Like prime locations will get higher revenue because people will bid more for prime locations and stuff like that. And some estimation of how many eyeballs did your ad get, and also why pivot? I mean, did you feel that COVID may be long term? Because I mean, driving was not like something which one would imagine would stop, right? People would continue to drive, so the market would continue to exist even if there was a hiccup due to COVID.
yeah, no, two things. First, the running the cab model in India was fairly challenging because of bureaucracy, right? And we had some horror stories on how bureaucrats actually literally took us apart of using their power. Of course, I don't blame them because we were operating in the gray area, and it was proving to be more and more difficult. Of course, we were before COVID, we were just trying to endure that and not look sideways. Things went to a point at one point, like this one story. Right before Dashara. Dashara is a big festival for cab drivers because they do all the Ayuth Puja and all. 2 days before Dashara, they started impounding all of our cars. Right, they were literally they impounded some 50 cars. One of the driver, they've even locked him up because when the
Oh.
car was impounded, he was all swag about you don't know who's behind this company and all of that. Just because we won some award from the chief minister for best startup award, he thought we are backed by the chief minister, and he was giving all money to the police officer, and then he got locked up. And we started getting these calls at around 6 p.m. in the evening and all through the night and the next day. And there was so much pressure from the drivers to get their cars out because they had to travel to their places, so they had to take their families. So bunch of these, and the police that we were dealing with then made sure that the cars did not come out for the next 1 week, and we were constantly sitting at their offices requesting them to let us go. And all of this was after we have a certain level of permissions, not that we were operating completely without permissions, right? It was purely because that one officer did not want us to operate for whatever reason. That incident taught us that there's just too much power in one entity to shut us down overnight if they want to. So we definitely wanted to de-risk the business. That was one. And second, while during COVID, we did not want to lay our team off because it was the worst time to lay off. And so we were continuing our payroll. Of course, all of us took voluntary pay cuts on whatever we could. And we had the last 2.5, 3 crores, and we did not know how long the lockdown or the whole effect would go on. And as long as people worked from home, cabs were not as much in use, which meant that we didn't have as much advertising inventory to sell. So it was kind of a forced pivot for us in the short term. But in the long term, of course, it's so much more easier to run this business versus the Captop business. So it worked out in our favor.
Okay. The Captop business was like a three parties in it. One is the advertiser who pays some money, then you, and then the cab driver come owner. I'm assuming this would be like driver come owners whom you had deals with. How was the revenue split?
Yeah, so you're right. It's like a three-way marketplace where we are the kind of the enabler platform, and then there are drivers who would come on board, have the devices, and produce inventory, and advertisers who would buy the inventory. So we would pay the driver per hour that they would produce in form of inventory, whether the advertiser bought it or not. And we would, of course, charge the advertisers for every hour that they purchase. But what we would pay the driver is obviously a small amount compared to what we charge brands. So that's where we were able to create the margin to run a profitable, I wouldn't say profitable, at least gross margin profitable business back in the day. And drivers were also made about some of the actually well performing drivers made as much as 8,000 9,000 per month. which is literally half of their entire savings that they were able to save for a month, right? And on an average, drivers made about 2-3 thousand, which was still good, meaningful revenue for them. And brands would pay about, let's say, in terms of cab hours, they would pay about 100 rupees an hour. Basically, one car advertising the brand for 1 hour would mean one cab hour, which is about 100 rupees.
Why
So
would some drivers be better performing? This is like a
someone who would drive, let's say, long hours, some
okay.
of the cars had two shift drivers who would drive 12 hours.
Got it. Okay, 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 okay.
Cars which
Got
were
it.
driving for
Hmm.
longer meant better yield on hardware for us and better
Hmm.
revenues.
And your screen had an inbuilt GPS which would tell you if the car is in motion or not, where all
Yeah.
is
So
it.
as soon as it entered specific geographical regions, it would automatically change the ad, and we would have ads also being tailored based on the traffic conditions and bunch of these kind of parameters, time of the day. And we did a bunch of interesting campaigns. We would do campaigns like when it's passing by a restaurant, we would do a happy hour for the restaurant in the
Yeah,
locality
nice. Okay.
if the footfall is in the low in the restaurant, right? So we would do some very interesting real time campaigns for these local
Hmm.
clients.
Fascinating. So, what was Plan B then? So this was Plan A, which due to COVID and due to the fact that it was a regulatory gray zone causing you problems, you thought was maybe there were scale challenges there. So what was Plan B?
I mean, we always had the vision to kind of build. So, like, literally, our tagline was Google Ads of ambient advertising, right?
Okay.
So, we always had the vision to be everywhere ambient. I would say COVID kind of accelerated that. We first wanted to win the cab space and then get into this, but then COVID kind of made us jump directly into it. I would say it's been there since the beginning.
What is ambient advertising? Like, what does it include? Like,
Yeah, so if you think about it, Akshay, so there are primarily two forms of advertising, right? One is when you're actively consuming something, you get interrupted, and then you go have some ad. It can be TV, it can be digital in some cases even print, right? And then the ambient advertising is more subconscious, where you're just going about by your day, and then your subconscious consuming advertising and content. So ambient advertising that way has a very unique value proposition in terms of having a very subconscious effect on your mind. And also that's also one of the traditional advertising spaces which was positively affected by digitalization compared to other traditional formats like print, radio, TV, and all, which were kind of disrupted by digital revolution, right? So ambient advertising is any advertising that's in your ambient spaces which you kind of consume passively.
like in an airport, you have all those screens.
Yeah, airport, even your outdoor billboards, something
Hmm,
that you see inside your elevators or in your
hmm,
elevator
hmm.
lobbies. All of that counts as ambient advertising.
Okay. By the time COVID hit, how much revenue were you doing in the uh, Captop advertising business?
Captop, we were doing then probably around 20 lakhs a month, 20-25
Okay.
lakhs a month.
Okay. And what besides IKEA, who else was there as customers?
I mean, we had a lot of local brands,
Okay.
and then we had some relatively larger brands like Excite Batteries was there, and then we had Apollo Tires, uh, but mostly local brands
Hmm.
because we were also mostly only in Hyderabad and a little bit in Mumbai by then. So most large brands only come on board once you have like a pan India network when it's
Ah,
getting larger.
okay. 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 Got it. So tell me about the pivot then that you made. Which part of ambient advertising did you go after? How did you? What was the journey of building that up?
So for us, the pivot was also an accidental pivot, right? It was not fully planned that this is what we wanted to do, elevator advertising or anything. So before COVID, one of our customers called us up saying that there is this company that wanted to put elevator screens in their community, and for to approve that bid, they needed a competitive bid. That's how he spoke to us, saying, "Can you guys send in a competitive bid?" We told him we're not into that space. We're not interested. Somehow that transaction did not close, and the same transaction came to us after 6 months, saying, "Please give a competitive bid, whatever value. It doesn't matter, even if you're interested. We'll give go with the other company." And then that's when we sat down to think about, okay, should we actually do this now that we
Uh,
don't have a meaningful business at hand? That's when we sat down, gave our actual formal bid, and then we won it. So that's how we got into it, very accidental. By then, we were, I think, down to about 2 crores or so in the bank, and we had to literally repurpose the entire tech from the cab use case to this, and then build the entire hardware understanding and everything. And we've somehow miraculously managed to do that in 3 weeks' time,
wow.
and deployed our first screens. So deciding to get into actually deploying our first screen was just a 3 week transformation. And the team was like super focused because they've not been doing much work for the last 6 months due to COVID, and they were like so hungry to get back at it.
Mm. So this is in elevator or in the lift lobby? This that you're talking about.
In the lift lobbies, we started
Okay.
with lift lobbies and later started doing inside elevators as well.
Okay.
In gated communities, because back in the day during COVID lockdowns and all, people were just spending time at home and nowhere else. So we
Mm.
started with gated communities and eventually expanded beyond
Mm.
gated communities.
Uh, I think this has been happening in at least restaurants for the longest time, right? Like I remember even.
There was, yeah, one generation of companies who tried to do this back in 2007, 8, 9. They were trying to do it in CCDs,
Yes,
McDonald's, and places like that.
Nerula. Yes.
Uh, that's also one of the most frequently asked questions from investors, saying, "Okay, they've had bad experiences in the past, and why do we think it'll work this time around and all?"
So that generation of companies which were doing it in 2006-7 focused on restaurants, they did not deliver great outcomes for investors, is it?
No, they all burnt money. In fact, some of them raised insane amounts of capital as well. Back in the day, of course, that's when Focus Media became, or rather, the initial success of Focus Media in China came about, and they went public and all, right. It obviously inspired a bunch of entrepreneurs to do the same in India. But the problem was infrastructure wise, India was not ready. We did not have enough high rise buildings. We did not have enough infrastructure on telecom side to actually deliver content remotely to screens. So people were running it out of pen drives. And the problem with places like CCDs and all, it's not like you have tens of thousands of them in the country, right? You could probably across the country have 500, 600 screens or 1,000 screens, which did not mean anything really. So it did not work for multiple reasons, and also economies were not working out because hardware was very expensive, advertising costs were very low. There was not enough spend on consumer advertising. So all of it put together, things did not work then, and we did not know of those models when we started this in India. Only after talking to investors is when we realized, okay, there were models earlier as well.
Hmm. So it sounds like this is a market in which building supply is supremely important, as opposed to a lot of markets where you focus on building demand. Here, building supply is more important. Like the more supply you have, the more inventory you have, the easier it is to attract demand.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, for us, luckily, it wasn't too much of a chicken and egg problem. Of course, we will need capital to add supply, which otherwise, in a traditional way, would come from customers. But venture capital, that's where exactly is built for models like this, right? Which will help you hack your way to a large supply without meaningfully large demand.
So,
So that's how Zomato's check kind of was life changing for us.
how does, or just tell me the economics of adding supply? Like, if you want to add 1,000 more screens, what would it cost? Like, what are the different elements of that? Of course, there is a hardware cost, but beyond that, what else is there? Like,
I mean, there's hardware costs, and then there's cost of operating the screens in terms of the rent that we pay to the property owners, and
Okay.
the overall maintenance cost that goes into maintaining the network costs, and bunch of these costs. Of course, I can't get too much into specifics, but that what makes up our overall costs, right?
What's like a ballpark cost per screen?
We cracked a pretty low cost way of getting the screens and all. We also make them here locally. We have specific OEM partners, but product is designed by us. So bunch of things that we do where we get that advantage both on pricing as well as design. So we also customize these screens to the interiors of the buildings and all of that.
Customers, as in the size, the color, the look and feel.
Size, color. Sometimes we add fancy frames around them to make it look like a painting, and
Uh,
a bunch of things that we do.
and this one-time cost is the biggest part of the cost, or the monthly cost is equally high? Like, what is the split between?
It's mostly the biggest cost is obviously the rents that we pay to these buildings, which also is the moat which we have with someone coming into this business can't pay as much as we can to buildings because we have so much more advertising revenue coming in than let's say a network who's trying to set up 500-600 screens. So that kind of becomes a cyclical moat into the business.
Classic network effect kind of a
Yeah,
business model. The more inventory you have, the more advertisers you will attract. The more advertisers you will attract, the more you will be able to sweat your inventory.
correct,
And the more you are able to sweat your inventory, the better you are able to pay for acquiring more inventory.
correct, correct.
You said that the check from Zomato was a life changer. Tell me about that. Like, how did that come about? And uh, you during COVID, you ran this experiment with one contract for one, probably a residential high-rise complex, which you would have done. How did that convert into your primary focus leading up to the Zomato round?
Yeah, so when we still got into the business, the cabs were still our primary mode of business, right? And it wasn't, once we got in, we really gave it a proper shot. We then converted a bunch of other buildings and we got to some to 300 screens. And I think we were doing about 1 2 lakhs 3 lakhs of revenue per month, and a little bit more eventually. So with that it was enough traction also to go back into the market, and we raised another small 3 million post covid, largely still talking about the taxi top business, that this is our main core, and then we also have the side business which is already starting to give out revenue and all. So then, after that 3 million, we were able to meaningfully expand. In the next 6 months, we've of course decided to shut down our caps business, and then we started focusing on expanding this business, and we got to a reasonable scale of about 2,000 screens across 3 cities. Then, and this kind of
And this was outbound, or like responding to these RFPs, or like these
no.
tenders, or like.
We went on ground acquiring communities, very traditional BD manner, cold calls and everything, right?
Mm. Like the
Uh,
RWA, or the whoever is doing the maintenance for a residential complex would be your target audience here. Okay,
correct.
and your
And
pitch to them is that extra money free of cost. There's
yeah,
nothing you have to do. Just
and of course, the infrastructure is something they also like because they could do their notices on the screens. They could put
okay.
their pictures of their events, and also we were giving the infrastructure for free to do that.
Mm, got it.
And
Okay. Mm.
extra money obviously, right? And we would do some good engaging content on the screen which would engage users when they're waiting there and all. So that when we were expanding on that, of course the second wave of covid came in, and it completely slowed us down. Unfortunately, we lost our head of VP sales during covid, which was a big blow to us. So we then somehow picked ourselves back up, and that was also the time when Zomato was going public, right? And Zomato then obviously back in 2019 was introduced to us by Ant Financial, folks, more to work as a customer, and we were trying to do bike screens with them to see if
Ah,
that's a model that
okay,
can work.
okay.
We were still trying to convince them on the bike screens idea and all around the time when they were going public. And then Dipinder, one fine day, after like a series of texts, and then I let him be. After a couple of months, he just texts me saying, "Can we have a call tomorrow?" And then, not knowing what the call is about, I again obviously went into the meeting having the bike screens as the primary agenda item. And then he just started talking about the business on what we're doing and all. And we obviously,
He was up to date. He knew that you were getting into this lift lobby. Uh,
yeah, he knew because the round before that, VSS participated, and we wanted Dipinder also to participate. So I kept hounding him on the updates and what's happening. And of course,
nice.
areas of collaboration on what we can do with Zomato and all. He didn't come into the round, obviously. But on that conversation, it was a very quick half an hour conversation. Just he said, not the bike screens. Let's not talk about that. And we just asked more questions on the business. And then he said, "Can you guys fly to Delhi tomorrow?" And it was Diwali that day. The next day, then we told him it's Diwali. Then he said, "Okay, day after tomorrow." Then we flew to Delhi, met them at their office, literally 45 minutes, and then he said, we want to invest $20 million, right? And then we told him that we can't really take in that amount of money at this current scale. We don't need so much and all, and we somehow settled at the 15 million figure. And that's how our first big check came in. And by then, Zomato was, of course, a customer. And then their teams have seen a reasonable traction on the platform, so they understood the product. So the vision completely transformed in terms of how fast we want to scale up, right? And that was the first big, meaningfully large check that could be materially that could materially change our course of growth. And that happened, and from there, I think we went on a rapid scale journey, and we wanted to literally hit 50,000 screens in the next 1 year.
Oh, how many screens
And
were you at when this happened? This
about
conversation with.
2-3 thousand screens,
Okay. Hmm. Uh,
and we took
Tell me,
almost one and
why
a half years
does
to get there.
why did Zomato want to invest? What was it a, like, say, InfoEdge invests in a lot of companies purely as an investor? There's no like, it's not a strategic investment. It's a venture funding which they do.
Yeah, it was mostly financial.
Okay.
They were investing in a bunch of companies. They invested in Magic Pin. They invested in CultFit, and so the delivery companies, of course, Shiprocket, and also for them, they like hyperlocal space. They like the fact that local businesses will be able to advertise more effectively. They felt that this is a missing piece in terms of local businesses being able to promote themselves. So they liked the space. They understood the space also quite well because they had a sizably large advertising business selling to restaurants and all. So they liked the company, and it was a financial investment that they've made.
Mm. Okay. 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 Got it. Okay. Okay.
Then And this was, of course, also during the frenzy days of 21, 20, early 2022, right? When valuations didn't make any sense at all. And was also obviously what we were valued at was like, uh, uh, was a frenzy day valuation, right? And
How
it took
much were you valued at in the Zomato round?
we were valued at 770 crores post money.
Wow,
And the year
amazing.
before that, we had 3 crores of annual revenue, and it was just
Uh,
crazy.
how much was your net worth on paper at that time?
Uh,
100 crore
I
plus.
think both of us together we held about 40, a little over 40% of the company then.
Mm, incredible. Mind blowing experience, right? To
Yeah,
suddenly be.
mind-blowing experience. And then how quickly the decision was made to invest such large sum is something that we couldn't wrap our heads around because we were coming from the days when we spent literally 1 year trying to raise 20 lakhs, right?
Hmm, 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 hmm.
And yeah, so I mean, that was only the beginning of it, right? We thought our struggles are done now and we are in Disneyland and stuff like that. And to our utter surprise that with big money comes big troubles. So,
What
uh,
kind of big troubles?
so we, of course, big money forced us to set ourselves on a course to kind of hit rapid scale, right? Like we
Hmm.
spent literally 18 months getting to 2,000 screens, and we wanted to get from 2,000 to 50,000 in 12 months' time, and that would mean literally tripling our size every month at that point, doubling our size every month, kind of. So we went on a rapid hiring spree. We went from being a 750 60 people company to being a 1,200 people company in a span of
Holy
three
cow.
months. And literally every new person we hired, his job was only to hire more people. Uh, and while we were going on that trajectory, of course, we were delivering on the growth targets, at least on the supply side. We were totally ignoring demand side because at least at that point, the perception was money is not a limiting factor, right?
Hmm.
Halfway into the journey, we got to about 25,000 screens in, I think, 6 months, 5, 6 months. We get hit by this hard reality that markets literally shifted 180 degrees, and that no more new capital is coming into the company. And by then, we burnt through most of our 120 odd crores we raised
Oh,
then.
shucks.
And we had like 30, 40 crores, and then our monthly burn was $1 million a month, right? We were burning like 8 crores a month. It was
You had
just,
a couple of months of runway, basically.
yeah, 3 months, three,
Oh,
4 months of runway. And
okay.
it was just mad. And we were sure that we were heading into a mountain and we are gonna die. So we had obviously two options. One, to absolutely cut costs and even undo the growth that we've gone through, let go of properties and all of that, and then come to again a bare bone structure where probably we have 5, 6,000 screens and then control everything. Or we could do something very radical and try to survive the scale while making it work before we run through the money. So we obviously took the later approach where it was super risky, which meant we could die, but we still felt we could make it work. So we didn't have enough time to again hire all salespeople to get the demand up. Demand, of course, did not grow along with supply because we weren't focusing on it. It was still around the same level where it was when we had 3, 4,000 screens. So what we've done was very interesting. Actually, we've entirely repurposed the people who were otherwise selling to apartments to get screens onboarded, and we brought them onto the team which sold to businesses to get business for the screens, right? And to our surprise, that they've performed phenomenally well. And in just, I think, couple of months, we came to break even, at least at a EBITDA level, and they started delivering unbelievably good numbers, and we were able to control the burn and get things under control. And ever since, we've continued to kind of stay near that EBITDA positive while we grow the business.
Amazing. What kind of customer segment were you targeting? Like, what kind of advertisers? Like, local businesses, or like,
With now 25 odd thousand screens, obviously we could do both. We had a team going after the large national businesses, which was also working out, and then we had a team that was going after extremely small local businesses, which was also working out. So we were doing both, and I would say local businesses was uniquely solved by us because there are not many options for them to advertise. But at the same time, we were very big with large brands as well.
mm, uh, I used to run a local business of about 15 years ago, which was a spoken English training business, offline. And I remember at that time my advertising options were largely newspaper inserts. Uh,
Newspaper. Yeah,
because newspapers were getting delivered, so that's how you would reach homes.
correct,
And
correct.
I'm assuming that this death of the newspaper meant that they needed more digitally savvy options, and which is where these screens would have come in.
Yeah, so for at least the local businesses, the problem is slightly more complex, right? Of course, one, newspapers are dying, but the other option that they have, digital, is just a complex world. They then had to hire a digital agency, which meant it's additional retainer costs, and even then, it's like so complex that they don't understand what's going in and coming out. They needed something more simple which they can understand at the same time, which can effectively target. Even however digital savvy campaigns you run, it's still targeting a 3 kilometer radius is insanely difficult.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you
yeah.
have no idea
Yeah.
how much accuracy you're hitting. So I think that's a sweet spot that we figured that we solved for smaller businesses.
Yeah, for them, this is a very clean replacement of the newspaper insert, right? The newspaper insert is also hyper local. You can speak to the vendor who's delivering the newspaper in a particular society. So yeah, yeah, I understand. Amazing. Uh, what kind of revenues do you do now? What's your ARR or MRR?
Last year we have done over 100 crores. We closed it around 107
Wow, amazing.
crores.
And how much do you expect to close this year?
This year, we would be most likely growing another 50%.
Hmm. What is the split in this? How much comes from large chains and how much from hyperlocal businesses?
Largely for us, we have a big participation from the local businesses, which in some of the cities make up more than half of our earnings, right? And we of course have the agencies that contribute to some revenue. We do large national direct brands that contribute to the revenue. And then we do other ancillary things. In some cases, we do some activations in these communities and all, which again is a very small portion of our revenue. So that's how the mix of revenue for us is.
What do you mean activation?
Let's say a brand, along with let's say someone like a Mercedes, along with advertising on the screens, they also want to display a car in a community, right?
Ah, okay.
We sometimes facilitate that as well to
Okay.
be done.
Because you have the
Of course,
relationship to make it
yeah.
happen. And you're still at 1200 headcount? What's your headcount like?
No, no, now we are 800.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you rationalize? How did you figure out whom to keep, whom to not keep?
So largely the 1200 count, the difference between now and the 1200 were essentially growth teams, right? So once we've repurposed people into selling to brands, there was natural churn where people who did not want to do this format of sales, because the earlier format of sales is where you had to give money to communities. It was so much more easier, and
Yeah,
this format of
right.
sales is where you have to take money. So there was a lot of natural churn where people moved out, found other things to do, who did not want to do this. So we did not do any explicit layoffs on our end. It was more natural adjustment of the business that got us to where we are.
How do you balance the two growth engines, the supply growth engine and the demand growth engine? Like, in terms of which one do you focus more on, and which one do you want to invest more in?
So it's not this or that or anything. So it's more in phases for us, very honestly. So last couple of years has been purely on focusing on demand, getting to profitability, and proving model at scale and all of that. And now, after the most recent fundraise, of course, again, the shift now is back on growing number of screens. While having said that, we want to grow while remaining EBITDA profitable, right? So we have to now do both simultaneously. It kind of goes in phases where at different phases one takes precedence over the other, but kind of we have to keep balancing both throughout.
Okay, okay, okay. Interesting. Um, so, what is the recent fundraise about? So, you had the Zomato raise, and then you had that near that experience where you had a couple of months of runway, and somehow you managed to bring the revenue up to survive. Then, what happened after that?
And I mean, then obviously the whole industry went into a slump, right? Number one, we were dealing with issues of reduced advertising spent from bunch of these new age brands and all. So pre the slump, our large 40-45% of our revenue came only from startups, right? Like the crazy spending and that was coming from new age companies. So now we had to deal with the fact that that went to almost like 5-10%. And then we were dealing with the bad investor sentiment, bad valuations. Literally, we grew 10x, and then we had to really argue over transactions to get a 30-40% jump from what we had earlier, which is also the more sane valuation given the context of things today, right? So it was largely just putting our heads down and doing what the business needs, and really not thinking of anything beyond making today work, and just focusing on that core bit of execution to bring things to profitability. So it's been that, and of course this round has come after almost 2 years since our Zomato round, which was a fairly long time given we almost ran out of money in 2022 itself. That taught us discipline. The good thing about times like this is we kind of build in the systems in the company to get those resilience going, right? And I really love the saying that adversity kind of makes you stronger. Even as human being, I believe the longevity secret is really giving you a self-controlled adversity. Same thing for companies. I strongly believe that for us, at least the Zomato, post Zomato experience really was that controlled adversity, which made us build in a lot of systems into the company, which now makes us a very efficient business. Like literally, for us to get from get to the 15 $20 million of annualized revenue in our lifetime, we've literally only spent about less than $15 million, right? And this is including the pivots we have made and everything, and which is, and also the assets that we have currently, right? So which is something that we are very proud of, because that's not something that will come when there is excess money around and there's too much capital to be spent. So which is good. Now we know exactly on what are our priorities, how efficiently we can build scale from here, and how much exactly we need to raise and all of that.
Can you teach me how to make a business efficient? Like you said that this adversity forced you to run the business better. How do you run a business better? Like what are some of those
Yeah,
mantras or
I
principles?
mean, I might have come across as someone who now has been there, done that, and knows everything. But honestly, everything we know will be proven wrong in just a month, right? So I'm no expert at it, but what I can tell from our learning is it is very important to really question every bit of spending, right? And when money is not an option, you won't realize, but there are so many small choices that you make which goes in as culture to your team. So
Mhm.
you probably sitting on top would probably be thinking, okay, it's only 10 lakh rupees or 15 lakh rupees or whatever. But it's not that 10 or 15 lakh, it's a signaling that you're sending downwards into your organization, which happens and compounds at every level. By the time it goes to the bottom, you're actually spending a lot of money, which was not really needed, right? So it's more that cultural shift of even questioning that spend of 1 lakh rupees on, do we really need to spend this? Is it worth spending this money? And which again compounds as it goes downwards. Now in fact, Shravant and I, we have a tough time convincing the teams on ground to actually spend because no
Okay.
longer the same
Uh,
kind of era we are in, and we need to start spending again to grow faster and all of that. So it's a good balance that we bring, and it's mostly just the behavior that you kind of gets emulated within the team about frugality. And frugality is one of our top core values right now. And these are some of the small non-obvious things that kind of happens when you don't have enough money. And I think that's our learning
So
from that.
that's about controlling costs. What about growing revenue? Because you managed to grow your revenue pretty fast, right? Like to hit 100 crore last year. What was the previous year before that 100 crore?
We did 70 crores on that, but 70 and 100 was on the same supply. So we
Hmm.
had the same number of screens, so we
So
did not
you
spend
were able
anything
to
extra.
sweat the inventory better. Uh,
Correct, correct. Almost all of the increase was straight going into EBITDA.
hmm.
Uh, so for us, the growing revenue part, honestly, we as founders, we shouldn't take too much credit for it. It's a lot to do with the right people who are in the right places who really got it done right. And for us, some of the people, like literally, Suraj, one of our first persons in the team, right? He's like employee number two, who joined us even before we came in full time to the company. Uh, he still continues to head a big part of our sales team, and obviously along the way we had some other brilliant people who joined us, some from GroupM, some from other media segments. So I think it was largely driven by our sales leaders and how they've transformed the company. All we were doing is kind of giving guidance and really setting the tone on this needs to be done or we might die tomorrow, right? That really motivates people. And what happened during COVID and the actions that we've taken as probably promoters of the company to not let go of people, to give attention to what do they need than what the company needs, right? That really helped us because that also gave this cultural notion that people first. And I know it's cliched, but when you put people first, they put the company before themselves, right? And that was actually true. Everyone really rolled up their sleeves, worked very hard during that phase to make things happen, and also a lot of luck, right, for them to
Hmm.
for things to work out. We shouldn't take too much credit, also, beyond the point.
You know, I think founders often struggle with managing sales teams. I mean, you could end up being too prescriptive, like say creating a script, this is how you sell the product, and asking you how many calls did you make today, etc., etc. At a smaller scale. At a larger scale, of course, I mean, you understand what I'm saying, like getting too much into the details versus if you let it be too much, then again people may slack off. How do you find the right balance of managing a sales team? And what
I think
is
for us, we at least at a vice president level, we give a lot of freedom. We let them set their own processes and their own way of working, and at downwards from the vice president. So we have five vice presidents right now, all in sales. And then we have a sales director who works very closely with us, who the vice presidents report into, right? At the obviously the sales director and vice presidents level, we only talk about the larger numbers we need to hit, and we don't get too much into okay, this is the kind of process you need to run for your teams or anything like that, right? So each vice president sets their own tone, discovers their own process that works for their team. Some of them are very method driven. Some of them are more uh, I would say unstructured, but still very effective, right? And we believe in our learning, we've also understood that it's kind of very important to do that because India, as you travel across the states, behaves very differently culturally, right? And what works in Hyderabad might not work in Mumbai, might not work in Delhi. So having that decentralized system while still maintaining some kind of a common culture across was important, and I think that's what worked in our case, driving sales. And for that reason, we do not. We of course have those weekly meetings, review stuff, and all, but we don't set too much of process on how each of the ground teams need to function until the last level.
are these tough calls, these weekly review meetings, or are they like fun calls, or like
No, they're not very tough. So as founders, Shravant and I, we're not the ass kickers type, right? Uh, we don't really like you either perform or leave kind of style of management. We and of course all of these people are people that have been with a lot of them have been with us for over 5 7 years since the beginning of the company. We play cricket together almost every week, and some of them are even our schoolmates and people that we grew up together as well. So there's inherently a lot of trust. So very rarely that we will have to do conversations, tough conversations to really make them perform or anything like that. But of course, time to time there will always be that one bad scenario where we'll need to really put our foot down and then act. So that is there, but otherwise our management style is not the stick and carrot style of management.
Hmm. This round, which you've just raised, is like the largest round you've raised till date of 25 million. I think it took you a fair amount of time, right? About 1.5, 2 years to get this done. What were your learnings, at the end of getting success here? Like what worked? And is it just about being patient and things will eventually come around? Or like, what did you learn?
I mean, it's a little bit of obviously being patient and just focusing on the business and all, but also realizing that there's some things are not everything can be controlled by us, right? Like a bad environment is something that's just unfortunate, not just for us, even the VC firms who are trying to raise capital for them as well. Largely, it is about still trying to do the things the right way and trying to focus on the metrics that matter, not doing too much of too many choices purely focused around only raising the funds in the short term. And really continuing to build towards long term, irrespective of what happens short term. And for us, luckily, our existing investors believed in us to back us for this round, and they kind of started putting in money, and that's how it snowballed into a much larger fundraise.
Who were the new investors who came in, like the major new investors, and
So
what was their
we
thesis?
had Rigel Capital come in. They're a Singapore-based fund. So the partner who came on board was introduced by Zomato. Interestingly, he was an investor in Focus Media in their early days.
Okay.
Partner called Matt. So he understood the business very well. So I think that's one of the crucial things for our investors to have, because otherwise, not everyone would get a business model like ours, and it's not a very conventional model where you have like 10 or 15 comparable models. You know exactly how they'll turn out to be and all of that, right? So it needs a little bit of that experience of handling and looking at models like this, and which comes from the China experience. So that founder was investing actively, that partner was investing actively in China market 10 15 years ago. He understands China models very well. For us, obviously, China would have been a very easy place to raise funds from, if not for the geopolitical issue that was going on, right? So that way, it took us a little bit of time, but we did get people who really get us and get the model on how it works and all.
Hmm. Is the what's the basic pitch here, that as more people, as more urbanization happens, there will be more supply of inventory and ad rates will increase?
Yeah, I mean, a basic picture is this, right? 80% of Indian advertising budgets are chasing literally 10% of India, less than 10% of India, right? Which is quite literally the urban affluent, right? And they are responsible for over 50% of consumer spend, or almost 80% of discretionary spend, right? These audience, luckily for us, if you look at the India context or even Asian context in general, are very densely located in case of India in a very few cities, right? And places where you can find them in extremely high density are our extremely large IT parks gated communities and these kind of co-working spaces and cult fit kind of gym networks. So for us, the thesis is to get to as many locations as possible where we can tap into this 10 to 20% India, which is not the Bharat but the India, right? Which is responsible for all the consumer spend, and then become a meaningful part of their day to day life, right? Where they might find small interesting information on the screen, or they might discover a brand offer or whatever, right? Where we add a little bit value to their life and then get embedded into their life. So whether you're going into your gym or your office or your home, your elevator, so we want to be present there, talking to you, engaging you, interacting with you. So that is our larger thesis. And then obviously advertising dollars will then become kind of a byproduct when you have that level of distribution. Uh, that's our thesis for the business.
Okay. And what is your estimate of the TAM for this market, the total addressable market? How big is this market going to be?
So just as I've said, we like for any advertising product, this is true, right? Even for Google or Hindu or Hotstar, the core product is really attention of users. So you're not selling a print ad or you're not selling a TV ad or anything. You're literally just selling attention. So that way, in the advertising world, your TAMs between media types are very fluidic. So it's not necessary that, let's say, if we are growing to a scale, we will have to pull money out of other ambient advertisers, right? And especially as I've earlier mentioned, a big part of our mix comes from non-ambient advertising budgets, non-outdoor budgets, right? Almost 70% of it. So for us, that way we would look at our TAM as the advertising dollars that are chasing urban affluent as a category, and that's almost 70% of Indian advertising spend. And that way, I think it's a fairly large TAM, and there is scope to build a fairly large network as well. And in China, to give you a perspective, Focus Media has over 800,000 screens,
Wow.
right? And that is only one of the similarly large companies. There's another Shinsha, which is again 600,000 screens, and a bunch of those kind of screens, right? In all, China probably has over 3 million screens.
Wow.
So that's the scale that is potentially possible and can be built in India over the next 10-15 years.
Mm. What is the total number of screens in India as an estimate, like compared to
Probably
three
be
million?
around. Uh, I'm only talking about advertising screens, like the
Yes.
4 million China is all advertising. In India today, probably there'll be like 60, 70,000.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
Still a long, long
Mm.
way.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Uh, I assume there would be probably then a lot of VC interest in this space, right? Considering the like the massive gap between India and China and where India would most likely go to. Like it's a good bet for a VC to take.
Yeah, it's definitely it's definitely a good bet. Obviously, as a founder, we strongly believe in that, and that's the reason we're in this business to begin with. But even if you look at the macros, right, India is almost at the tipping point of the consumption boom, and almost every new per capita GDP dollar that comes in gets added to the discretionary spend bucket, which would mean even with a 3x in GDP, we'll 10x in consumption. With a 10x in increase in consumption, advertising will further compound to maybe a 15 or 20x, right? So there is a very strong indication of a large vicious cycle of consumption leading to more advertising, leading to more media spends and everything else.
Mm.
So we are at the beginning of it, and I think as long as we can get the distribution and then retain the kind of customers and meaningfully engage them on a daily basis, there's a very large opportunity to be built in India, especially in the ambient space, because this is not a space where the large heavyweights like Google or Facebook can come dominate overnight. And that's one of the things that not very good about India is that most of the advertising dollars are going to companies that are not Indian, right? Which is something that also is good to change.
Mm.
And I think in India, that shift today, though it is almost 60% Google, Facebook, would not be as much in the times to come.
So this is like the land grab phase right now. The more supply you can lock up, the more probability of being the dominant network. Who are the other horses in this race, like funded companies in this space of ambient advertising?
They, they are a bunch of smaller regional players. Of course, we control 85% market share.
Oh, wow.
So no one that's significantly large, and that's also a very strong moat for the business, because never in any of these countries like China, Vietnam, or any of these other countries where this model was prevalent, the number one player was ever displaced.
Mm.
And the player that gains the most market share to begin with will continue to dominate the market, and that also is the reason why there are literally tens of competitors who come in and die every year over the last 4 5 years also is happening. And
Amazing.
yeah.
What's the supply split here between office buildings, residential complexes, and commercial establishments?
So for us, about 70% makes up residential,
Okay.
and 30% makes us offices, and rest gyms and all is a small percentage. But in terms of audience, more than now about 50% audience come from offices, and 50% come from residential. As we go forward, the contribution of offices is only going to increase,
Hmm.
because end of the day, structured workspaces are increasing significantly faster than structured gated communities, right? So it's going to be much larger.
Hmm. Okay. Fascinating. Uh, okay. Give me one sec. Yeah. Let me look at. I had a bunch of questions to ask you, which I've written down. Okay. Um, for a founder, what advice do you have with respect to considering ambient advertising? Because, I mean, you probably don't want a founder to burn money on ambient advertising when they're not ready for it. So, when is a company ready for spending money on ambient advertising? When should a founder consider this seriously? At what stage? What are some best practices? Can you give some examples of people who got an outsized ROI on the money they spent for ambient advertising, and what were the hacks that really worked for them?
Yeah, I mean, so two ways of looking at it, right? If you're in a phase where you need to do a lot of brand promotion, which typically comes once you hit a certain revenue scale, and there you have to start building your brand more than getting into your performance marketing and all of that. So there, it's like a no-brainer, because when you're getting into brand, it's very difficult to do targeted branding, and ambient advertising is one of those kind of media platforms which can let you still be very targeted while you're doing brand promotions, right? And on the contrary, it also works very well for extremely small or very small new companies, where for you, getting to this particular set of audience is all that matters. And there is literally no other platform that can get as targeted as we can when it particularly comes to locational intelligence or data like that, right? So we've seen brands be extremely successful on both these both ends of the spectrum. And I would say in India, especially, we are still a very early brand country, right? Majority of our brands are still sub 100 million in revenue. And India as a country also will go through that tipping point over the next 5 years, where majority of the brands will start moving their focus from performance marketing to brand marketing, which will then meaningfully grow frequency for those brands and all. Now, of course, Zomato, Blinkit, and some of these brands have already gotten there, but a majority of still D2C brands are still sitting on the performance side. So these are some things that will change, and I think that's the fitment for these two ends of the spectrum. And particularly for the smaller clients, there were very small startups who literally did not have capital to spend on anything. They just had, I think, 5,000 6,000 rupees. They only did a couple of communities, got their first meaningful user traction from there. They, of course, coupled it with a bit of on ground activation of talking to people, getting their customers signed up, and all of that. And those cases worked very well when you do a combination of, especially for smaller brands, when you do a combination of offline activation plus the screens.
And what are some case studies of successful use of ambient advertising? Like, for example, should you put a QR code on your ad? How long should your ad be? Should it be video or static or an image? And I'm assuming these are all muted, right? So there would be no audio playing here. So what are
Yeah,
some best practices?
largely muted,
Hmm.
correct.
Hmm.
So for us, the typical life cycle of a user is that you walk into your elevator lobby or your building or a reception. You look at the screen, you discover something, find something interesting. Your first instinct is to pick up your phone, Google the brand, right? To interact with the brand. If it's already something like a Blinkit or Zomato, you exactly know what app to open, what to do, right? If it is, let's say, something like your neighborhood store, there's not a real action that you would take online, but you would rather visit the store whenever you feel like. Or if it's, let's say, a real estate one, we'll probably pick up on the phone number on their website when you Google it, right? So your most obvious action is to complete the brand action with your phone. So there's not too much value in having a QR code slapped onto your campaign unless it's a very unique, difficult to discover kind of a product, right? Let's say SEO is still not there, and then you still want people to discover you, then probably QR code will still act as a funnel to get users to you. But we would still recommend people actually start spending on this format of marketing when there is reasonable SEO around their product, right?
Hmm.
Because that's the life cycle user journey that happens. So, in terms of content, we've seen a significant shift come in terms of the production from having very static imagery when we started this model 3.5 years ago to a lot of, at least 60% of the brands now do interesting short videos. And that kind of coincided with how social media trend also shifted more towards the short video campaigns. And our media is exactly the same form factor where your production that you've done for your social media can be reused onto the screens, which is another macro trend that really helped the media. And obviously, short videos are always more attractive compared to a static imagery. And in terms of using call to actions, the most effective way was obviously for local guys phone numbers, which they would put if you're a real estate kind of folks, or for the larger guys they would put unique offers that would go around and all. So that's been our experience on what worked for customers.
Yeah. Would someone actually take the effort of noting down a phone number, or you need to have a
Most of them take
easy?
a picture
Ah, okay.
and then do it. But again, as I said, it only comes if they're not able to discover the brand
On Google.
organically on
Right.
the web. So it also is one of the misconception. A lot of times, brands think, okay, we are not getting leads from the platform just because people weren't calling that phone number on the screen. But they would see increase in leads on organic Google traffic, and we will have to tell them that, okay, see, this is also traffic caused by that because this is the user journey.
Mm.
So it's a non-obvious thing that doesn't always come to the client, which also is a little bit of education that we need to do and
Mm.
expectations.
Right, right. So before you advertise, make sure a consumer can just open his phone and find you. Otherwise, that money is not well spent. Like if you're a D2C brand, then probably you need to make sure you're on all the quick commerce apps so that someone can just
Correct.
search for you on a quick commerce app and order. And you should be in stock also, not be out of stock and stuff like that. Okay.
Okay, we've bunch of times had this experience where as soon as the campaign went live, there was a spike in demand, everything went out of stock, and then the
Mm,
brand had to come back to us, request to pause the campaign. And we are usually very flexible with pausing and restarting campaigns because it's fully digital.
mm,
So that did happen a bunch of times with customers.
mm. Uh, how important is it for you to build attribution in your product? And by attribution, I mean evidence to an advertiser that your money spent on this platform has led to X percentage increase in sales.
Yeah, so because we are largely categorized as top of the funnel media, right, which is largely
What
into
does that
branding.
mean, top of the funnel media?
So top of the funnel is where your intent is being built,
Okay.
intent to purchase a kind of product, right? And then bottom of the funnel is where your final action to actually purchase the product happens.
Hmm.
So as you go from top to bottom, it's more branding and then more performance at the bottom. So we as a platform are primarily catered around targeted branding as a mechanism, right? So we are efficient while building intent because we only get you to the right kind of people that are relevant to you. So it's not as critical as it is for, let's say, some of these performance oriented channels. Let's say you're an online news aggregator. There, it's super important for you to prove that you are getting branch conversions because everyone on the digital space does it, right? So in our kind of media, especially performance, let it be connected TV or even some of these other IP radio kind of platforms and all, it's very difficult to track conversions, performance, and all. So there, it's not as critical, but we do a bunch of things in terms of brand uplift studies and all of that, which help brand managers to understand what is the impact that's coming out. But mostly, the brands that spend with us are more concerned about whether they're reaching the right audience or not, than whether the audience are converting right after looking at that or not.
And how do you measure reach? That
So reaches, we obviously give them a certain signals that they can pick their target screens based on in terms of income segment or location and all of that. And then we have very accurate data on how many people live or work in a particular building. And because we are in the most obvious areas like elevators and all, you have to pass through those locations. So it's not exact eyeball impressions that we give, but it's an opportunity to see that gets created for everyone in the building every day.
mm,
They're more concerned about the reach metric in that manner.
mm. Okay, 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 amazing. Okay, so what is your product? Uh, like, what's the role of tech in this? What has been the product roadmap so far, and what is the product roadmap going forward? Is this more of a tech business or a logistics business?
Yeah, so I'll actually simplify things a little bit. Actually, so most of the media businesses, kind of their primary focus will be on bringing in traffic, right? And that is either by offering a core value, like let's say in case of Google search, or in case of let's say a daily hunt kind of guys, the content that they put on the platform and whatever, right? So in our case, new traffic is literally new buildings that we acquire every day. So every new building we acquire is a new traffic that's coming onto the platform. And the good thing for us is we don't have to pay to retain the traffic because once acquired, it's acquired, and we don't have to constantly compete to keep the customer. Right? That's what number one keeps our cost low. So now that we don't have to solve this side of the product problem, our entire focus is on really building an efficient tech stack which can do advertising, number one, more efficiently, and which can also run the operations of the company in an extremely efficient manner where it's super ops light, right, for us to run the model. So our product is more focused on both these fronts. So on the advertising, we do everything from integrating into the online programmatic demand funnels to actually giving meaningful insights back to customers in form of reports and all of that. And we also have a dashboard where brands can come on board, pick and choose their targeted parameters, go live on, and all of that as well. So now we are doing a few experiments around how do we make it more consumer facing, how do we enable transactions on the platform, and all of that as well. So that's where, which is a more logical progression for us, is what we feel.
How would a transaction happen on a elevator screen? Like,
Of course, it's not on the screen, but you kind of scan a QR code or use your NFC to tap on the screen, and then you do the transaction on your phone. So some of these models is something that we are experimenting with, which can be a big thing for us.
okay, that sounds pretty cool. So the screen would be NFC enabled, and based on what ad is playing, it would transmit a link to the phone, which goes and touches the screen. And I guess most of the phones that an urban affluent user would be using, all of those phones would be NFC enabled.
Correct.
Uh, wouldn't there be some sort of security firewalls on the phone, uh, or like NFC generally works through tap? There's no.
NFC usually works.
Okay.
Even nowadays, you might be seeing those NFC enabled visiting cards that people just tap on your phone to exchange contact details and all.
Okay.
Uh,
No, I
so
haven't seen
NFC,
those yet.
they're very big outside, especially in China and all. In India also now they're coming. So NFC usually works, but even without NFC, QR is a very
Yeah,
standard mechanism that everyone understands. So
right.
that's also a good way of interacting with the screens.
Like show a QR code, which if you scan, it gives you an additional discount just to
Yes.
drive an immediate purchase action or something like that.
Correct, correct, correct.
Interesting, interesting. So then it's becoming more like enabling of commerce happening. Fascinating. Mm. Okay. So let me end with asking you broadly, advice for founders around fundraising. Because you've had a phenomenal fundraise journey from that 20 lakh to now 25 million. What are like your top three recommendations to founders who are building something which needs VC money?
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously very stage dependent, especially to early stage founders. I would ask them to be super cocky about what they're building, and then just shoot for the stars, right? Especially when you're in early stage, if you are being very humble about what you're building and all, no one really gives a damn.
Hmm.
You really, because the people who
Modesty
invest
doesn't
in
help
early
you.
stage are only the crazy ones,
Yeah.
and crazy ones don't buy rational thinking. They only buy dreams and ambitions, right? So that's definitely my recommendation for early stage founders, to really be out there, make as many connections as possible, and then feel like you're the most important person in the room, right? And this exactly goes inversely as you scale to a larger scale, because at a larger scale, investors want to see founders being more stable minded, not extremely self obsessed, and then being open to really looking at how things are, rather than being blinded by a particular kind of ambition and all of that, right? And these founders are also, the investors are also, will increasingly get more and more risk averse, and so will their mentality keep evolving as your stage
Mm.
keeps moving forward. So I think at that level, it's more about building trust, making sure that you deliver on your promises, even if the promises are not extravagantly large, right? And being consistent in what you say and what you do. And end of the day, it's all numbers. And again, all of this is, of course, on top, but numbers make a really big difference, especially for businesses like ours, which are not necessarily some fancy tech that you're building, which will make money after 10 years, right?
Mm.
That I think is my suggestion. But I want founders to understand that selling is the first skill that they need to have, and in many cases, literally the only skill that they'll need to have, right? As long as you have the right kind of team to build things with you, right? And if you are a founder who are not so good at selling, or who's usually shy, I would definitely recommend finding a co-founder who is good at doing that, and then inspiring them and convincing them on the vision that you have.
Mm.
Um, So that would be my suggestion, Akshay.
Wonderful. What was your valuation in this round, the 25 million round?
It was post money about 115,
115 million. How much is that in crores?
almost 1,000 crores.
Amazing. So you are now personally worth like a couple of hundred crores.
Uh, yeah, I mean, on paper,
Amazing.
this is what I keep. So, I mean, many times the founder's journey is, I mean, obviously the glitz and glamour and all of that, that's what media talks about, right? But
Mm.
very often, founder's journey just feels like it's not worth it and it's like extremely tough, to be very honest, because you're literally the last person to be paid
Mm.
after
Mm.
everyone in the value chain, and
Well,
then
okay,
there is.
let me ask you this. Are you living your dream? You told me that back in college you had these big dreams. You were attracted by the glamour of being a startup founder. Are you living your dream?
I would say I did not imagine things to be this hard when we
Right.
started
Uh,
doing this,
uh.
and I've definitely aged 15 years in the last 5 years. Uh, for sure, mentally and physically. I probably mentally I've aged 25 years in the last 5 years.
Uh,
Physically maybe 10 years
uh,
of aging, but the moments of gratification is really when one of your early employees will was able to give that down payment to buy a nice house which they otherwise couldn't afford, or really when you return capital to one of your early investors who made a 10x on top of what they've put in by believing in you. I think those are the moments that keep us going. And very often, I feel founders are given way too much credit than what they deserve.
mm,
Actually, to be honest,
mm,
I think beyond a point, it's literally the team that runs the show, right? And in India and even abroad, what happens is very often founder is put on the pedestal, and then everyone thinks that's literally everything. He's making everything happen, and that can't be far from the truth, right?
mm,
In many ways, I really like where we are today because we're doing interesting, good work. There's a great team to work with every day, and of course, in the process, a lot of people will get rich and wealthy.
mm,
And I think I still have a lot of ambition for where we can get to, and also how personally I can contribute back to the founder community and the startup ecosystem. Probably another conversation sometime else.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Sandeep.
Thanks a lot, Akshay. It's been wonderful talking to you, and I think one of the things that I absolutely love about you, is how you've really gotten people together.
Mm.
Some of these insights that come out of your podcasts, I personally found them very useful while we were building the company. So, thanks a lot for doing that. A great way of giving back to the community.
Thank you so much.